I remember the first time I heard the term emotional sobriety, and it totally scared me because it sounded like something that I didn't know how to do. But I knew in my bones it was something that I craved. My problem wasn't ever substance abuse. That wasn't the issue that I happened to have. My issue was childhood PTSD. And that's what was turning my life upside down in a way where it was very much like being an alcoholic or a drug addict. I was exhausted all the time. I was late to things. I got angry easily. I was sad a lot. And this was back before there was a word for what happens to people who were traumatized as kids. I thought it was just me, and I was embarrassed, and I wasn't too sure that I knew how to change. So the feeling I got from those words, emotional sobriety, was like, it was just really powerful. And I wanted to have it. In recovery circles for drugs and alcohol, the word sobriety is a really important thing, obviously, but it means more than just not drunk or not high. In the context of substance abuse healing, sober means a person is living in a frame of mind and in an emotional state that is even keel and non-dramatic and that helps prevent relapses. Because that's what tends to set off relapse, emotional upsets, or any kind of emotional intensity, which can even include positive emotions like elation. Now, if you've ever had any kind of addiction, you know that it's the continued abstinence that can be the hardest. So staying sober can really depend on guarding against experiences that are going to be emotionally upsetting or intense, at least during early sobriety. And that probably means avoiding the slippery behaviors that can kind of open the door to intense emotional experiences, like, getting into an argument or having a one-night stand or letting yourself get too lonely or getting into sneaky activities of some kind that make you feel like you have to lie about yourself, like, stealing. So that feels pretty clear to me. Keep life gentle, not too crazy when intense emotions could drive you to take a drink or pick up a drug. But what about for people who are healing from trauma that they experienced when they were kids? What constitutes a relapse for us? I would say it's when we slip into emotional or neurological dysregulation. And that's the brain state that sometimes gets triggered in those of us with CPTSD. It can be a big avalanche of negative emotions or a discombobulated, spaced out feeling, or even a state of hyper-excitement about money or romance. Now, dysregulation isn't the same thing as intoxication, but it can mimic that lack of clear judgment, that volatility, or the complete lack of boundaries that you'd see in someone who's drunk or high. And if you're wondering if you get dysregulated, by the way, you might want to take the quiz that I developed that lists common symptoms. And that quiz is on the free tools page of my website. There's other stuff there. And the free tools page is always linked in the description below my videos. And I should say this, while dysregulation and intoxication are not the same thing, trauma and addiction are definitely related in that a history of trauma seems to have a high correlation with subsequent addiction. Some people like Gabor Mate, for example, believe that all addiction has a basis in trauma. Not everyone agrees with that, but even if all addiction arises out of trauma, even if that's true, one distinction between addiction and trauma is that with addiction, the substances themselves are the active agent. You take them, you get drunk or high. With trauma, there's nothing quite parallel to that. The active agent is seldom something that you consume. It's an experience or a behavior that functions as a trigger. And one example would be someone yelling at you. Your emotions would just, skyrocket like anyone, but because of the history of trauma, there can be an oversized intensity to it, a physiological reaction that you can't directly control or avoid. So without any conscious decision or behavior from you, without a conscious action, you can slide into dysregulation relapse. And I'm guessing that feeling is instinctively familiar to you. So how could a person with CPTSD strengthen themselves against that kind of relapse and cultivate emotional sobriety? The first thing is to be guarded around negative thinking and emotions that could be a slippery slope into oversized negative feelings. And it's possible to notice you're feeling sad or angry, but not to just dive into those feelings. A lot of treatments that are meant to help people recovering from trauma encourage the exploration of negative emotions. Oh, that's terrible. How do you feel about that? Sometimes that's a part of healing. But when it comes to healing painful memories, there's such a thing as healthy compartmentalization. Small upsets might be safe to let in and feel, but something horrible and upsetting might need to be kind of held at a slight distance for yourself. It's possible to look at a tough situation and not open your heart to it 100%. And of course, when someone always shuts down around painful feelings, that's not healthy, that's denial. But having a little bit of control over when to embrace the feelings and when to be a little more circumspect is a good thing. That's part of emotional sobriety. To some degree, you can avoid triggers. When you're working hard on healing from trauma, it may not be the time to start a new relationship or run for political office. It's a good time to engage more with activities that are calming for you. Exercise, being outside in nature, avoiding high conflict, high drama people, avoiding the news. When you're triggered, an ordinary feeling like anger can froth up into rage. And now you're on thin ice emotionally. And with CPTSD, rage can easily burst out into, saying something that you'll regret, followed by 3 days of intense dysregulation. Is it worth it? Have you ever had this happen? Or on the other end of the emotional spectrum, the trigger could be a positive emotion like elation or giddiness, triggered by something that feels thrilling or exciting, like when a person you weren't sure likes you finally texts you, or you get a surprise check in the mail. With CPTSD, even elation can be strong enough that it causes you to relapse just as hard as if you had a rage attack. And it starts as good news, but the resulting dysregulation can throw you into, eventually, depression, anxiety, brain fog, or romantic obsession. Those are some of the things that'll really knock you off your game. So emotional sobriety means being mindful about things that are emotionally intense for you, good and bad. And you can avoid experiences that are likely to trigger you while you simultaneously learn to calm your reaction to triggers. There's a strong emotional reaction, and then there's a period of dysregulation, followed by a period of getting back on your feet again. So when it happens, you can be working on it. Sometimes the victory is that you got out of your slip and you didn't let it lead to an avalanche of dysregulation. Now, falling down, getting back up, it's practice. It's how we do it. It's how you'll learn to use your tools to start handling stress in a better way. But of course, when it's too much, it can really set you back. If you're hiding from life, though, you're not getting the chance to learn. Now, of course, it's impossible to completely avoid triggers. Life is full of them. They can be subtle. They can be automatic. They're things that you did nothing to cause, like, a car almost hits you when you're crossing the street, or waking up dysregulated. That happens to me. That's an emotional flashback. You can't just stop going outside or stop working or stop waking up, but you can focus on noticing and arresting the emotional reaction that follows. Now, that's easier said than done, but there are ways to do it. For most people who went through abuse and neglect as a kid, there are some pretty standard patterns in terms of emotions. The emotions that can snowball include fear, like fear of abandonment or a panic attack, anger, definitely anger, a feeling of injustice or a feeling we're being unfairly singled out for mistreatment or left out, being overlooked, being discounted, being criticized, being rejected, feeling jealous, and definitely shame. That's one of the big ones, feeling ashamed. And so it starts with like normal level thought, like, oh, I think I may have said something I shouldn't have said. But with the CPTSD kind of interacting with it in your mind, it can escalate from I shouldn't have said that to I'm a worthless idiot and I'll be alone forever. And this kind of self-attack can then lead to hurtful behavior towards others, which can lead to more self-attack or retaliation from them, in fact. And then the feelings go out of control. They get giant, they go all over the place, they no longer make sense in the context of what happened. Is that a familiar thing with your CPTSD symptoms sometimes? So emotional sobriety is the state when a person has gotten skilled, not at denying their emotions, but at halting the progression of emotions from an ordinary right-size level to a, full, incredible Hulk, ripped t-shirt rage attack. And having some control over this takes time. It takes practice. Talking to people, learning from them, learning to tolerate the times when you fail, and getting support from people whose experience and judgment you trust. Part of this healing cycle is getting back up on your feet and trying again. And it may bother you sometimes that while you are exercising emotional restraint, other people are just allowing themselves to go emotionally wild. They can yell, they can rush into a relationship, they can stay home and eat ice cream in bed all day if they want to, and nothing bad seems to happen. But don't let this fool you into throwing away your emotional sobriety. Even people without CPTSD do better when they pause and temper those impulses. For you, pausing is everything. It takes self-discipline to avert the intense reaction. But the more days you live through where you haven't freaked out on someone or made an impulsive decision, the more you have an inner equilibrium that makes it easier and easier to pause between trigger and reaction. Now, just like with alcohol or drugs, it's easy to get cocky and think, I haven't jumped into an instant or ill-advised relationship in 2 years. I think I can handle jumping into this relationship that's right in front of me today. But we all know what happens. The same old thing, only sometimes even worse than before. Now, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say that alcoholism is progressive and fatal. And that means a person might not drink for many years, but if they relapse and return to drinking, it will be as if it has progressed a great deal during the years they weren't drinking. It's more severe than it used to be. And it's my experience that emotional sobriety is vulnerable in the same way. You haven't raged at another driver in a long time, and then your defenses get weak one day and you end up, chasing somebody down the road because they cut you off. You're leaning on your horn, then you feel ashamed, and the dysregulation comes back. But now you know you're capable of something better, so the shame feels even worse. And maybe that's a good thing, but the pain is there worse than you used to feel it. That's sometimes how we learn. And when you notice you're in the danger zone, with the gateway emotions, if you will, you can take immediate steps to back out of them before it gets worse. Don't make hasty decisions. Don't make big pronouncements until you've had a chance to run it by a trusted friend. Use measures like my daily practice, which is the set of techniques I use every day to release emotional residue and get calmer and clearer. You can exercise, take a shower, dance. You can bite a lemon. Anything that helps give you a little nudge, a little push on your nervous system with a sensation or a movement or a reminder that you're working to heal those old reactions. They help. Other people might tell you, oh no, you're doing it wrong, that you need to feel your anger, or you need to grieve, or you need to go deeper into your emotions. And ask yourself, does the person saying this know about the role of dysregulation in complex trauma? Have they experienced it? Do they know what it's like to turn into the Incredible Hulk when emotions come up? They know what works for them. You're learning what works for you. And the triggers in life, they never stop. But here's how you'll know that you're growing more and more emotionally sober. One is you'll keep a fairly positive attitude even when life's problems come up. You will use words and honesty to express your feelings rather than manipulate people or fear how they'll react if you tell the truth. You will be comfortable when you're alone and comfortable when you're with other people. You'll be able to say no to those people gracefully when you need to. You won't feel the need to people please. You'll be willing to help other people when they ask, and when it's reasonable to do so. Yes, you can say yes, but you're not going to feel like you have to fix them or save them. You'll have the power to go slow in dating relationships so you have time to get to know the other person and assess if they're a good potential partner for you. And when you see red flags, you'll step away. When you're sad, you'll cry, but you won't get sucked into an emotional black hole. When you're angry, you'll be able to stand up for yourself or work things out if you want to. And when the other person isn't willing to work things out, you'll be able to accept that without losing your calm. You'll develop a genuine interest in other people. And rather than wanting to get something from them or make them fix you, you will be happy to find that you're capable of meeting your own needs. And then the need to help or rely on other people won't scare you or drive you into self-denial. You'll be able to ask for the help that you need when you do. You'll be able to tune out other people's unnecessary drama, right? You'll have enough self-discipline to care for yourself and the people who depend on you in an ordinary and good enough way. You'll give yourself enough sleep, enough exercise, good food, and a good social life. You'll begin to feel confident that whatever happens, you will figure out how to deal with it. There's this idea out there that to heal from trauma, you need to feel your feelings. And some people will encourage you to feel your feelings and explore your feelings and trust your feelings. But when you have PTSD from childhood, the problem isn't always that you don't feel what you're supposed to feel. More of the time, I think the problem is that you do feel your feelings too much, They get overloaded. And I can show you how to reel that back into a healthy balance. It's called emotional dysregulation, and in my opinion, it can do even more damage than being out of touch with your feelings. Your life can get dominated by your emotions. Are you familiar with that feeling? Your relationships get dominated by your emotions. Your career gets dominated by your emotions. And being so emotional, like having feelings that are inappropriately intense by most people's standards, or when you get emotional at inappropriate times, that's not something where feeling your feelings is the solution. In my view, emotional dysregulation really is kind of like a wrecking ball or like a tornado that spins around and wrecks everything in its path. Where's it going to go? You don't know. It just sort of comes up out of nowhere and boom, starts destroying things. Sometimes emotional dysregulation goes in the opposite direction, and it just sort of like it's like a light bulb, where all of a sudden it glows really brightly and then goes out. It's dark. There's nothing. You're not feeling anything. Blazing light, nothing. With complex PTSD, what is often a symptom of emotional dysregulation is that flatness after a big outburst. So you might be familiar with some of those patterns. Feelings go out of control. They're coming out in bursts. They're out of proportion to what's going on, or at an inappropriate time, like crying at work or having an angry outburst at your internet provider when you're on a customer service call. And it also refers to going flat emotionally. So it's dysregulated. It's just like not kind of in the middle area that would be appropriate or normal or comfortable for human communication. So big spikes, nothing. But either way, when your feelings are dysregulated, you might say and do things that only overwhelm you further. And then that actually create new traumas that make your situation even harder than it was. So it can be a vicious circle. So one example could be having an argument with your partner. So let's say something makes you angry. And they forgot you had friends coming to dinner and you cooked, but your partner arrived an hour late. You didn't know where they were. They never called. And the guests arrived and you didn't have an answer for them. And you called your partner 3 or 4 times and you texted and you called and you were getting more and more frantic. You're in the other room to try to hide how angry you are. And the friends are there. And you're trying to act normal and like everything's fine and it's no big deal that your partner's not there. And then an hour into the dinner, your partner walks in. They totally forgot. And they see everyone and they remember, oh my gosh, they're so sorry. And they're embarrassed. And the guests are like, it's fine, it's fine. And you're like, where were you? And you're trying to act normal. You're trying to keep your emotions kind of in the bandwidth of not totally awful for the guests, but you can't. And so they're ready to sit down now and enjoy the company. But for you, it's too late. That's emotional dysregulation at work. Because old feelings of being ignored and abandoned are just exploding up out of the past. It is an offense that your partner forgot. That's not cool. But the intensity that's coming out of you has more to do with the past. You know it because it's like filling up your chest. It's in your gut. It's in your head. You might start getting a headache. And the guests are there. So don't you hate that? Getting emotionally dysregulated in front of company. It was definitely a faux pas that your partner forgot, but everyone was actually okay with that. They could forgive it. It's your reaction to the situation that's now ruining the evening. Has this happened to you? In the moment, it feels like these huge emotions are the only feelings a person could have. And now, later, you're going to have the insight that your reaction was actually too much, that you became the problem person of the evening. So maybe your guests left early because it got so uncomfortable. But when it's happening, it just feels real. It feels necessary to be that angry, right? It's moments like this when maybe you've said things you didn't mean because now you're not just dealing with disappointment and hurt, but you're believing that nothing's any good. Because you know what's driving you at that point? Shame. Just the old shame of like that old well of anger and emotion came up and kind of blasted out. There's like this point where, it's feeling really real and you get so mad and then it blasts out of you. And that often sort of triggers you to start recovering and coming back to reality from like, wait, it's not really that bad. So then the shame comes in and you feel worse. Then you might feel a need to check out. You go flat. You can't apologize, everything. Well, this is how friendships fall apart. This kind of thing is how it falls apart. And it's not your fault you got this way. This is a really common and normal response to having grown up with trauma. But of course, we all want to work on it and learn to handle it even better. Even if your partner is used to this kind of behavior and they stick around,
this kind of conflict that doesn't feel realistic, that feels overblown, it'll gradually drain away love and trust and close off connection that otherwise would be getting deeper and getting sweeter over time. So that's another way relationships get destroyed. So this is what I mean when I sort of give the side eye to the idea that what we all need is just to feel our feelings, or you just need to grieve, or you just need to get in touch with your anger. Like, that's not always the best advice for anybody. It's not always what's needed. For some people with CPTSD, what's needed is to self-regulate and get more control over emotions, and to have some tools in your tool belt to know how to do that on the spot, even before you really know what's going on with you, even before you've been able to process or talk through what happened. Just when you realize, like, uh-oh, I'm going over the top, how do you pull yourself back? Because that's how you can make a positive change for the better. Once you can manage that, you start having a huge amount of space where you can talk things out. You can ask questions. You can express yourself and say, you were late for dinner. We had company. I was so embarrassed. You can say that, but you can say that in proportion to, what the problem really is. All right. So I'll show you how to do that. You'll find that if you can control emotions before they get intense, so starting early, you may have this little window of opportunity to do that. You can avoid a lot of problems that come from overreactions and overwhelm, and it's easier to get back to a calm and regulated state then. So I have a friend who visualizes emotional dysregulation as an airplane taking off. You may have heard me talk about that. And regulating her emotions is what she calls keeping the airplane on the ground. And I love that. That is what it feels like, because, yeah. And so you can think of that too. How are you going to keep your airplane on the ground? Once it takes off, it's just a great big deal. So how are you going to do that? You can do it. You can stay regulated even when you're upset if you understand what's happening and you practice, practice, practice. So when you go into a strong emotional reaction, one is notice it's happening. Are you flooding with emotion? Are you feeling adrenaline? Are you panicking? Are you starting to cry? So say to yourself, I'm having an emotional reaction. Because it's just true. You can just say that to yourself. Just ground yourself in reality with that. I'm having an emotional reaction. So another thing you can do is slow down the interaction. Just get it way slowed down. A lot of us are very sensitive to hurrying, and yet once we start panicking, we start rushing. So it sort of compounds itself. So you can just back up, take big pauses between what is said. Take your time to answer, take your time to say things, consider your words, prepare to see things in a new way. Now, a lot of the time, simply slowing things down can reduce the overwhelm. That's all that's needed. Less overwhelm means you can recover your perspective right there and then and experience a little calming effect inside. If you're about to cry and you don't want to cry because you're at work or you're giving a speech or you don't want to be vulnerable in a particular situation, here's a great trick. Imagine that on your stomach, like right below your belly button, that you have a knob, all right? And the knob goes all the way up to 10 or 11 if you like Spinal Tap. If you have emotional dysregulation, it definitely goes to at least 11, all right? So now imagine that the tears are coming because you accidentally left the knob at about 8. So now just in your mind, dial your belly knob just down to 2. Just bring it down to 2. And sometimes that's all that's needed to just stop the tears, control the tears and the sadness. It is like somebody left a gate open or something and the cows are running out. So you just shut the gate or bring it down to 2. You're not cutting off your emotions 100%, but just controlling the opening there. All right, if it's anger that's happening, use what used to be called restraint of pen and tongue. That's a really nice phrase. I use it all the time. It's so helpful to me. And it means don't say anything or write anything, including emails, texts, letters. Don't do it when you're angry. What happens is this venting will escalate your emotional overwhelm, and your thinking gets distorted, and you might say things you don't actually believe and that you'll regret. And of course, if you've ever had a conflict over text, it never goes well. There's no way to communicate the tenderness or the caring or the listening. It just sounds like somebody snapping, no matter how you handle it. So don't do that. When you're angry, don't write. Instead, because it's important to express yourself, promise yourself that you'll express yourself just a little later when you're calm. You can find a gentle, polite way to postpone any more conversation. You can just say, I really want to have this conversation. It's important to me. I definitely don't want to, get all intense on you. Could I just have 15 minutes so I can just bring my emotions together. You don't even have to say that if you're at work. You can just say, you know what, I have this other call. I need to go do that. Can I come back and have this conversation with you in 15 minutes? So whether you choose to tell anybody that you're taking time out to emotionally re-regulate or not, people will generally accept that you can continue the conversation later. And whether they realize what was about to happen or not, it's good for everybody for you to show up kind of regulated for all your conversations. It's good for you, it's good for them. If it feels urgent for you to express yourself, that is often a cue that you need to take double time pausing and getting re-regulated. The sense of urgency is not always reliable with CPTSD. It's basically your old like emergency response kicking in over stuff that's just about communication or saying how you feel. So when it really is an emergency, if you need to pull somebody out of a rushing river, or you're in an abusive situation and you need to get out the door, of course urgency is appropriate. But if it's just about communicating something or trying to talk something through, if you feel urgency, it's very likely going to only benefit if you pause for 30 minutes or an hour or tomorrow. There's very little that has to be solved like in any given day. That's important. So if you can come back regulated in more time, that's really good. Don't underestimate the damage you can do when you try to solve problems when you're dysregulated. It's kind of like driving drunk, okay? All right, another thing you can do some emergency writing. And I'm talking about the daily practice way of writing that I teach. I have a free course. I always link it on the free tools page of my website. The free tools page of my website is always linked down in the description section below. But it's called the daily practice. And I teach a specific technique where you can get your fearful and resentful thoughts on paper, kind of ask for them to be removed, rest your mind. Give it a try. So many of us have had it experience life-changing healing from being able to put our emotions on paper before just kind of throwing them at another person. It often feels, especially if you were neglected as a kid, that what you really, really need is to tell somebody how much they hurt you, because there's this fantasy that if you tell them, then they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll come in and I'll care for you and I'll help you feel better. But in adult life, that's usually not how people respond when we come at them like in anger. They don't respond like trying to help us. And if they do, it's probably not coming from a healthy place. But also, it's not realistic that other people can, even if they want to, that they can re-regulate your nervous system. It is an inside job. So we take those feelings to the paper and have a process for relieving them before having the communication. We do need communication, but when it's packed up with like all your unmet childhood needs, it becomes something quite frightening and overwhelming to other people. They're either going to run or they're going to pretend, but it's going to be a disappointment and it's going to hurt your relationship. So paper, that's a suggestion there. What I love about paper, you can do this just about anywhere. In the bathroom, you can do it in the dark of a movie theater, you can do it in the car when you're a passenger, not driving, obviously. You can do it in bed in the middle of the night. You can do it at your desk while you're pretending to work. And employers, I'm an employer too. But here's the thing. I'm not saying that you should just fake work and steal time from your employer like that, but sometimes the most efficient way to get productive in your day is to take the overwhelming emotions and just get them out on paper so that you can return your focus back to the task at hand. That's a good thing to do. It's definitely better than having an emotional meltdown too. All right, another thing you can do is get some hard exercise to kind of like rinse all those stress chemicals out of your body. You can run up and down a flight of stairs a couple times if you are physically able to do that. If you can walk, you can take a brisk walk. Whatever you physically can do to get your heart rate up, maybe just break a little bit of a sweat. It just is so powerful to turn around the stress chemicals that are active when you're in emotional dysregulation. And sometimes you can come at emotional dysregulation through reason. Sometimes you have to come at it through physical action. There are a number of ways that you can approach your healing. So I'm giving you a list of them so you can find your favorites. All right, here's one. This is another physical one. You can wash your hands, or in a big pinch, you can take a shower. Wash your hands in cold water, splash it on your face. Everybody does that, right? Sometimes. Or wash your hands in nice, warm, soapy water that feels nice, and just take a minute to feel the water on your hands and the soap and the clean hands and feel how nice that is. You're using these tactile experiences to just sort of come back from this sort of flight away from what's actually happening for your senses right here in the room for you right now. This is called being in your body. And I don't actually believe that people leave their bodies, but that's a metaphor for what happens when our nervous system is starting to shut down, like quadrants of your brain are just going dim, and you're not able to process sensory input from where you are. And that's when you're often vulnerable to outbursts or saying things you don't mean. You want to be in touch with all of your feelings. You want to be in touch with cues. You want to be able to detect danger. Like if you're going up and shouting at somebody on the street, what if they're dangerous? What if they could physically harm you? You need to be tuned in, right? And so that's why physical regulation, neurological regulation goes hand in hand with emotional regulation. So we're learning to master re-regulation of both. It all comes down together, and you begin to be centered in a calm awareness. And you have nice ears to hear what's going on. You have eyes. You have a heart to feel what's going on. And imagine, like, if you could do that, that would change a lot, right? So emotional dysregulation feels to me, and I think a lot of people, a little bit like a trance, like you're hypnotized. You're a little bit out of touch with some things. You're deeply in touch with something else, a feeling. And what you need to develop is to have part of you that can sort of stand outside that situation and go, I see that I'm going into a trance-like dysregulation state. And that part of you that can see it's going on can kind of take you gently by the shoulders and say, hey, come on, Anna, come on out. Let's get out of this dysregulated state. Let's use some tools. Once you have that part of you that can sort of pull you back a little bit when you notice it's happening, you've just gotten on the path to serious change. That's how you do it. Self-awareness, just enough to pull back. Before you know what to do, before you've solved all your problems, you're just like, okay, this thing is happening. I know it doesn't go well when I, say things and try to solve problems like this. Let me take a beat. All right. If you like, you can talk with somebody who is trustworthy, they understand you, and who's not in that moment in a conflict with you. Very important. Someone else. Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective, but I don't recommend trying to tell a long story. I don't recommend trying to vent, going into yet another hypnotic trance, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then, have you done that? I've done it. That's bad. That just takes me worse into emotional dysregulation. So the discussion, it doesn't usually work that well when you're already upset, but obviously sometimes this can't be avoided, and somebody will try to help you and assist you to kind of emotionally calm it. The irony is that one of the hardest things for a person in emotional dysregulation to hear is, can you calm down? Ma'am, please calm down. It's like, whoo, it goes off again. So sometimes it's going to be you by yourself. So one way to check in with yourself when you're having one of those conversations is to ask yourself, is having this conversation making you more dysregulated? Are you feeling more upset? Are you maybe talking faster and faster, louder and louder? Are you talking on top of people? These are signs that you're actually going into dysregulation. So if you can have that part of you stand outside and go, oops, I'm getting more dysregulated. You just find a polite way to say, okay, well, thanks for your help. Now get yourself to a private space with your pen and pencil or your tools, your physical tools, to start bringing yourself back before you begin talking again. Talking is sometimes the gateway drug to more dysregulation, just saying. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. We need to learn the difference, because when we're dysregulated, it will often dysregulate the person we're talking to, and that's how terrible conflicts get going. Because when we're dysregulated, the person we're getting all dysregulated on will often also dysregulate, and two dysregulated people will often escalate quite badly. You've probably been there. Everything that needs to be said can and should be said, but not necessarily in that moment. If you possibly can, wait until you're regulated, calm, more lucid, able to feel the range of feelings you have about someone, and not just the angry part, not frantically trying to get them to understand something. These steps, by the way, don't just help you regulate emotionally, but they help you re-regulate your brain and in your body, your heart rate, your breathing, your thinking, your coordination of your feet and hands, your ability to focus. So I have a quiz you can take if you want to check some of the symptoms of dysregulation. If you're hearing this and you're like, wait, that happens to me. I got a list of them and you can check them off on this list. That is in my free tools page too that I mentioned on my website, free tools. The link to the free tools page is down below in the description section. When you're re-regulating your emotions and the intense thoughts keep just fluttering in, just keep reminding yourself to hold the thought and instead focus on next steps, positive actions, positive words. This isn't positive thinking. It's not toxic positivity. This is just redirecting your thoughts when they're sort of going whack to a clearer mental space, because that's part of you too. You have clarity in there. You have a place in there that has less emotional charge, where you can anchor yourself. You can remind yourself that's your home. That's where you go when things get crazy, is into this home inside. You're not suppressing your feelings. You're just postponing expressing your feelings until you're a little more regulated. And contrary to popular belief, by the way, you don't have to talk things out to get regulated. Talking about your feelings, it's important, but there's a time and a place, and sometimes that best time and place is later, when it will be helpful and constructive, and when it will help you have and keep and strengthen relationships with people you love, people you treasure, even though it doesn't feel like that when you're emotionally dysregulated. So when this happens, just keep reminding yourself by silently telling yourself, I'm feeling dysregulated. And then use your tools. Stop venting. Remind yourself that you don't need to express yourself and clear the air right then. Your words will be there. Your feelings will be there waiting for you when you're calmer. You will have access to yourself. You'll be no longer dysregulated. And then when you express yourself, you can do it elegantly and with fairness and love. It'll feel great to keep your relationship gentle like this and to get past the shame of overreactions. And then you can enjoy the way that your connections with other people, rather than getting ruined, begin to get nicer, deeper, stronger over time. People with childhood PTSD, through no fault of their own, can sometimes have overly strong emotional reactions. And if you were abused or neglected as a kid, you know how this goes. Something hurts your feelings, you have a huge oversized reaction to it, and you know it's so big it's going to create problems if you express those feelings to the people around you. So you start working really hard to pretend that it just didn't happen. You either try to shut down your feelings or you run away from the situation. And it would be great if you could get through life this way, just putting up a facade to pretend that you're not overreacting or running away whenever things get awkward. You could just get a new group of friends every week or two, right? And basically just change yourself at will to fit whatever situation is happening, to not be you. That's how your childhood PTSD is trying to make things go, to just stop the consequences of your emotions at any cost. But as we've all learned through bitter experience, life requires something a little smarter than that, something really hard for us. And that's to hang in there sometimes, even though we're having an emotional reaction, so that we can separate out what's real and appropriate and what might be the trauma coloring the way we see things. And there are some people in situations that you do want to push out of your life, but that's for another video. What I'm talking about today is a strategy for you to be aware when your emotional reactions are taking hold of you, and what you can say or do to handle those situations better, to express yourself when you need to, but take care not to push away the good people you appreciate and who you want in your life, okay? So the first emotional reaction that can push people away is that when we're hurt or disappointed, we disappear. And there are a couple ways we do this. One is we pretend we're fine when we're not fine, and then at some later date, we disappear. Or in some cases, we act fine and disappear like all in the same, 5 minutes. But either way, we're pushing people away. So let's take an example. All right, let's say that you and your friend have talked for years about taking a trip together to Mexico. And it was never a firm plan, but it was something that you'd been looking forward to and you assumed it would really happen. And you're eating lunch with your friend just like you do every Thursday, and she tells you, hey, I've got exciting news. I'm going to go to Mexico with my new boyfriend. And it seems like she doesn't remember that you talked with her about that many times, right? Has that ever happened? So you end up saying, oh, great. And you have a choice in that moment to tell her how you actually feel, Or because if you have childhood PTSD and you've had some painful experiences telling people when your feelings are hurt, then out of shame and fear, you might just go silent. You might hide. But either way, again, you're going to push them away. And so you feel like that's happening, right? You fear it and you try to prevent it. And so that's what disappearing is. It's an attempt not to damage the relationship, but unfortunately, it's also going to push people away. But here's what disappearing looks like. You're boiling inside. You can't believe she would do this to you and pretend that she had no memory that you two had this loose plan, that you were going to go to Mexico, and you're fighting tears and your heart is pounding and these emotions are coming up. And somewhere inside, you know the plan, it wasn't firm and she's probably innocent, but there's this other part of you that's about to slide from sad and feeling kind of sucker punched by this news to angry and mean. Fight response, right? Disappear is flight. This is the fight response. And of course, you know what always happens when the mean part comes out. So you don't want to be mean, so you just stay silent. That's freeze, right? And you just sit in awkward silence with your friend, or you fill the silence with chit chat. That could be fawning, right? But actually, you're not there. You're so far away, you're gone. And as soon as you can get out of the lunch, you find an excuse, you get yourself out of there, and you say, bye, really nice. But then comes the long silence, right? Where you avoid, where you ghost them. And when Thursday rolls around again, you tell her, oh, I'm busy. And the next week she texts you to see if you still want to meet up and have lunch, and you ignore her text this time. And the whole time you're thinking, I should just respond. I should just go. I should quit making such a big deal out of this. I'm going to regret this. I got to tell her how I feel. But the later it gets that you haven't answered that text, the weirder you feel that it's going to be when you actually do respond or get together. And that's where the temptation comes to just really flee, to really blow the whole thing off. And now you've really pushed her away. And it might be recoverable, but your friend feels hurt now. So even worse, if she calls you the next day to find out what happened, you don't want to take her call. You don't want to hear how she's hurt. You don't know what to say. Or it's worse than that. You do pick up the phone, and this time you do the second CPTSD emotional reaction that pushes people away, and you release a whole boatload of anger on her. Fight. You start out with I statements and feeling words. You go, well, I just feel like we talked about this, right? But then the conversation just rolls over a couple of logs there, and next thing you know, you're blowing up. You're going into accusations and yelling and talking on top of each other. You were hurt, she was hurt, and then you tried to disappear your feelings so hard that what happened is it came out of you like lava, all right? And you say hurtful things, unfair things. Things you know are only going to damage the relationship, but it just seems in those moments, there's only going to be relief if you can get them said, if you can convince her how hurtful she was. And, she might have been realizing she was inconsiderate by forgetting your plans, but now she just wants to get away, and that wasn't the outcome you wanted. Okay, so let's unpack what just happened here. You were hurt. You tried to disappear instead of talking to her, and then you tried to use anger to get her to recognize your feelings. But all you've got now is someone who wants to put up a wall against you, and she definitely doesn't want to take that trip with you now, right? But if you have a pretty good friendship, then one of you, sooner or later, is going to try to talk things through. And it might even be you who starts it, which I would give you a gold star for. If you're still in the emotional reaction of it, then when you get together for lunch again, even if you start out with kind words and taking responsibility, you're going to end up doing the third thing that pushes friends away. And that's when your expectations of other people to care about your feelings becomes child-sized. And when I say child-sized, I don't mean like this, I mean like this, which is to say enormous. We have these child expectations. And again, this is not your fault. If you were emotionally neglected by your parents when you were little, it is so normal to have these huge outsized expectations from friends and partners later on. There's just this big neglected, empty space inside. And so when something hurts you there, when people make you feel overlooked or excluded, what they get from you is hit with expectations that you rightfully had as a child, but that are totally inappropriate now that you're an adult, and you're laying it on them. And that doesn't feel good for them. Now, as a child, you needed to feel important and treasured and central to your parents' lives, but with adult friends, there's a time to step aside for them, to have other relationships, to go to Mexico with who they want to go with, and it isn't always going to be with you. Now, when you were a kid, if you had to suppress those feelings of abandonment and just soldier on, it has a way of making you kind of squirrely around plans and inclusion, you know? So your friend taking the trip you wanted to take with her, with someone else, which is okay. It's not like you had dates set. It's not like you had tickets. That would be another story. It triggers a lifetime of pain in you, though. It all comes roaring back in your nervous system. You might not even be conscious. You're just feeling awful. You're sad. You were supposed to be cared for. It's so understandable why feeling left out now is intense. But the thing is, for friends, these expectations, and you know this was part of yourself, even when the emotions are spilling out and sabotaging everything, these expectations are unreasonable. To your friend, it feels like bullying, or it feels like you're crazy. And that's how we push people away. You know that up here, you can see that a rift is coming. But down here in your heart, it's like a desperate little kid is driving. It's being a kid all over again. It feels in those moments like there's no way to talk it through. There's no good outcome. And the temptation then is to do the fourth CPTSD thing, and that is to vilify your friend, to justify all the struggles you have with handling the feelings or expressing them or working them out, but just writing her off as a bad person. And we do this in 100 ways, right? You're arrogant. You have no idea what other people go through. You're a narcissist. Your boyfriend sucks. And okay, we could go on and on. We point the hurt out here rather than feeling it in here and working on it here. And that's how we do the fifth CPTSD thing, where our pain causes us to not be able to see people. It sucks us into ourselves. We can't see people. And you know, if you're going to have a good friendship, half of that is you being a good friend. And one key property of good friends is that they are capable of feeling happy for their friend when something good happens. We can't be in some mental mathematical model where any happiness they have with someone else is an insult or it robs us of our due with them. And I chose the example of this vacation that, you know, it's sort of a vaguely planned vacation. And then it was forgotten by the friend with the new boyfriend. And I chose this example because that is inconsiderate and it does hurt, but it's the kind of thing that happens all the time between friends. They don't owe us the care that a parent owes to a child. And they can't actually cheat on us because there's no such promise like there would be in a committed romantic relationship. And yet we react like this sort of thing is happening. A friend is someone you support, who you want the best for, and for whom you give forbearance. You give them a little space to make mistakes or to have a misunderstanding. You would never want to force anyone to take a trip with you, right? It wouldn't be friendship. It wouldn't even be fun. I've been on trips like that. And so the solution in this situation is to be a person who has several friends, who's not relying on one person to be your everything. That way you can take responsibility that you have a dream, you want to take a trip, and if it's not this person, maybe you'll try that person, maybe you'll go by yourself. But you're not going to put responsibility for your happiness on your friend. Now, was she disappointing? Yes. So here's what you might have done earlier in all this, back at that first lunch where she first told you that she was going to Mexico. All right, so your friend says, guess what? New boyfriend and I are going to Mexico. Okay, so just like before, you get a strong emotional reaction. And you grew up and abused and neglected, so that's going to happen. Okay, but here's what you might say. Oh my gosh, that's so great. You must be so excited. Now, you're expressing that you want the best for her, even though you're not feeling it right now. And then you can say, you know, I have to admit, I'm having a bit of an emotional reaction about it right now. And I'm totally happy for you. But for me, I'm kind of crushed. I don't know if you remember, but you and I talked about a trip to Mexico. Do you remember that? And then your friend might go, oh yeah. She probably knew, right? She probably did remember all along. But she'd go, oh yeah, well, I didn't know we had an actual plan. All right, now that's fair, right? And then even if you still feel all your strong emotions, you can speak out of your highest values And know that the way your feelings are going to come back to earth later is going to go better if you can be true to your values now while they're just going crazy. You're not acting directly on your intense feelings. You're acting on your values, that you want to be fair, that you want to be level-headed, that you're going to give yourself time to think about things, to see what you need to express if you need to. It doesn't ever have to be like in this minute. I do think there's a lot to be said for speaking up in the moment. But sometimes as people with childhood PTSD, we need time to kind of think this through. Maybe use our tools to calm the triggers down. Maybe check in with a mentor or a coach or a friend, kind of go, am I being unreasonable here? So in this case, I would just say, I've created an example where it's hurtful, but the right thing to do is to give her your blessing, because you can't force her on the trip. And if you want to stay friends, you got to find a way to work with this and be an independent spirit who has several people you could make such a plan with, or do it by yourself. Okay, so this is a friend you care about, you want her in your life. And so something you could say is, the way that I feel so bad about this makes me see that I really need a vacation. And I'm going to take some time to figure out how I can do that. It sounds really fun what you're doing. I hope you have a great time. And there it is. It's really graceful. You've been honest. You haven't suppressed your feelings. You haven't squished it down and tried to, obliterate yourself in order to be accepted by somebody. You've said how you feel. You've also been gracious and loving. And if you watch a lot of my videos, you know what I'm going to suggest next, right? Yes, the daily practice techniques, so that you can move some of those strong emotions about the past, about the present, and just keep them processing and moving so that you can feel courageous and optimistic enough to take positive steps in your life. Maybe you don't want to be friends with this person. Maybe that will become clearer. But if your pattern has been to push people away, it's worth a try. To live through your values of wanting to be the best, to operate in the best interest of your friends, and also for yourself. So she has a good life, and you have a good life. And you come together not out of resentful obligation or neediness, but freely, because you both want the best for each other. If you had childhood trauma and you've sought help for the problems that it's caused you in your life, you may have been told that you needed to get in touch with your anger to heal from the trauma. And I know for some people there is something freeing about that, for a while anyway. But if you were already angry, if you were already just barely holding in the rage or the irritability or the contempt you inherited from growing up abused and neglected, that's a really dangerous assumption that what you need is to go even deeper into those harsh emotions. The fact is, people with complex trauma can tend to get emotionally dysregulated. Feelings can go from a normal level to a surge level suddenly, for seemingly no reason. And in the moment, it feels like the right level of anger. But later you can see what everyone around you could see in that moment, that it was an overreaction. And it's this kind of anger that can really cause problems in your life, especially when it becomes a habit or when anger becomes a kind of drug that you unconsciously use to get up and out of depression. And I'll explain that in a minute. So how do you draw a line between healthy anger, it's an emotion we need, right? And unhealthy, dysregulated anger? How do you know the difference? Now, before I had any healing from my childhood trauma, one of my biggest problems was in my relationship to anger. And one of the most hurtful things that anyone's ever said to me is, you are a very angry woman. And it hurts even now to say that. My meditation teacher once said that I used to be what he called a serrated knife, but I was. I was rough, I was sharp, I was carrying a lot of anger. And that's not irrational. It's what I knew. Because first of all, the adults in my life when I was a kid went way out of control with their anger. I grew up watching my dad rage at my mom and my mom berate my dad, and the two of them would smash things and get violent. And even after they were divorced when I was 7, anger and rage became the default way that they communicated about anything. So we had a lot of alcoholism in the family, and drunk people make everybody angry, and the angry people make the drunk person angry. So I grew up terrified of anger in myself and of angry people. And I know a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. I remember when I was 5 or so, I was angry in my own right about something, really angry. And instead of a temper tantrum, I went around the house and folded a folding chair. And I carefully took a vase down off the mantle and put it gently down on the hearth. And that was my way of saying I was fed up, damn it. I couldn't bear roughness, though. I couldn't bear the yelling and the doors slamming and the sound of breaking glass. There was a lot of that. The silence when you know something really terrible is coming, that used to really scare me. I hated violence. I still do. I hated the sounds and the smells of drunken people. And there was no way around it. It just put me on high alert and this weird kind of tension inside. So in my teens and 20s, I figured that I'd solved things by just avoiding angry people. And I thought of myself as a very peaceful, loving person. And it's not that I wasn't, but I had a lot of anger, and I didn't even know it sometimes. I remember before I ever learned to re-regulate my brain, my emotions were confused. When I acted angry, I was actually hurt. And when I was depressed, it was because I was angry. And I did passive-aggressive things like gossiping and making sarcastic comments. And I had BS'd everybody about what I was feeling for so long, I had no idea what I was feeling. And then I started therapy and had a place to talk about what happened. And it started out, I didn't really have strong emotions about my childhood, but boy, the therapist kind of confirmed how bad it had been, almost to a fault, I would say. And she'd want me to talk about it and talk about it. And soon, oh yeah, I had some serious anger going. And the more I talked to her, the angrier I got. First like the legitimate anger, but then kind of like this weird, like dissociated anger. And I read some books and I talked to other angry people, and soon, like everywhere I went, with everyone I hung out with, I was coming off angry. I was the angry woman. So I was a real drag to hang out with, to be honest. It was me now. It was I who was raging and smashing things like had happened when I was a kid. And I wasn't as bad as my parents, but I intentionally broke some dishes in the kitchen once. I threw a ceramic mug out the passenger window of a car. And even thinking about this now makes me feel awful. It was frightening to the people around me. So I don't want to do that. I thought I was getting in touch with my feelings, but actually I was losing control of my feelings. And I was learning to amp them up and almost dissociate, using them like a drug to do that. It wasn't cathartic. There was no feeling of being done with the feeling. It just wore me out. It just tore me down. It alienated everyone. And there's nothing healing about that. So luckily, I stumbled on a new way to heal, and I quit that anger-based therapy and started using techniques that helped me very quickly get those harsh emotions quietly out, expressed. And this gave me comfort instead. It gave me a clear mind to get the focus off all the bad things from the past and onto my present day surroundings and how I was handling things. And from there, it was a lot easier to start solving problems and building a happy life. Now, maybe you're also in the process of finding the techniques that work for you, or understanding what part of your behavior is just trauma-driven and what is part of you. So if you want to learn more about common symptoms of childhood PTSD, I created a self-evaluation that you can take, and you can see what's happening for you. And there's a link to that. It's a quiz. I have a series of quizzes actually for different parts of your life and how CPTSD might have affected you. And I have that along with my daily practice calming techniques. And it's all on this page called the free tools page of my website, crappychildhoodfairy.com, free tools page. That page is linked down in the description section below. I just try to get it like into your hands very easily all the time. I'd like you to have that. Really, it's free. So these days, having stuck with my techniques for years and years and continuing to work on myself, I've made so much progress. And I wish I could say that kind of PTSD anger never comes back, but it does sometimes. And the progress is that I notice it right away and I can change course on it quickly. Some anger is normal and natural. It's a useful emotion. It's an honest response to unfairness and hurt. It tells you when action is required. With healthy anger, it flashes through you like burning paper. And sometimes it lasts longer, but at a certain point, when it's not helping you take action or solve problems, anger that lingers turns into unhealthy anger. And that is something many of us were encouraged to have, or in fact became addicted to having. anger as a solution for pain. That's kind of the idea out there. And I wanted to tell you why it feels like that's true, that it's a solution, but it doesn't work. So you can think about your feelings on a vertical scale, all right? And way down here is death, or you're catatonic or something. And then right up here, well, right here, you're depressed. And then obviously there are degrees of depression, and it's a terrible place to get stuck. And if something you do or some therapy you try helps you go from depression to anger, which is pretty common in the psychology world, this might be helpful because it's up. You're going from depression up to anger. And it's pretty easy to help someone get angry. It feels good at first, doesn't it? Because it gets you out of bed and up off the floor. When you're hovering at the bottom of the emotional scale down here, anger and rage are a step in the right direction. And you think, wow, this is a breakthrough. I'm feeling my anger. And there's this energy to it. But it's a mistake to think that anger is the solution. This idea that feeling your feelings is inherently constructive is just not true. There's a time when we need to get in touch with our feelings and a time to be angry and a time to move through that. So if anger isn't transformed pretty quickly into some clarity of mind and sane action, it'll just take you right back down the vertical scale into depression, isolation, and down on the floor again. So what to do with the anger? For me, it is the most profound turning point of my life when I was shown how to put it on paper. And I put my fears and resentments about life and tragedies and the injustices and the petty little things that bother my mind. It all goes on paper, and I ask God to remove it. Now, you may not believe in God or any kind of higher power, and if that's the case, you can write it using my format and then write a release statement. So I ask God to remove it, you can release it. Writing and releasing is the core technique I teach, and this is how I had my transformation when I was sad and scared and struggling with PTSD symptoms. You just might be amazed at how much more effective and clear-headed you are with those resentful and blamey thoughts out of your head, at least for a little while, out and on paper, so that you can be emotionally free enough to see what needs to be done about problems. Because sometimes the situation is, it's just crying for you to jump in and act, to do something. And other times, nothing needs to be done. Sometimes it's just an angry, stray wisp of emotion that got dredged up and it softens and it's gone. So everything depends on you knowing the difference, asking yourself, is this anger something I need to attend to act on, to express myself, or am I basically having a CPTSD reaction? Now, when you have some freedom from the fearful and resentful thoughts, even if it's just for a little while, you're in a much better position to see the difference, to discern whether it's time to forget or time to get busy. And taking action is everything when it comes to healing your life. Now, if you're like I was when I was first using this freeing technique, I worried that if I lost my anger, I'd have no defense against abuse and pressure from people. And it's been my experience that the opposite is true. When my mind was tangled up with anger and resentment and someone was acting negatively toward me, I used to get paralyzed or confused. And I start flailing around trying to fix the situation without understanding what was going on. When I started releasing all that fear and resentment, and there is a technique, again, it's a technique. It's not just journaling. It's not just, I release it. But when I was actually getting free of all those racing negative thoughts and beliefs, I could see. I knew when I was being attacked, and I knew when the disturbance was actually in here. I got clarity. And with a clear mind, I'm able to take responsibility when that's in order. I can respond appropriately to problems. I can either protect myself or get away from problems and danger, or stay and work things out if that's the right thing, if that's what I want. I have a choice. And if you do this consistently, you have fewer problems. And when things do go wrong, you can work them out more gracefully. You don't have to fret. You don't have to freak out. When something upsets you, you're in the habit of clearing things up. So you know what to do first. And that's to calm the inner disturbance so that you can be clear what you need to do. Most of the time, all you need to do is take a deep breath and carry on.